The wars of independence in Africa, beginning with the Algerian conflict in 1954 and continuing through the following decades, brought self-determination to the continent, but also created millions of refugees. The terrible suffering of these uprooted men, women and children, and the instability caused by huge numbers of people on the move, triggered a groundbreaking response from the continent's leaders. In 1969, the Organisation of African Unity Refugee Convention was adopted. It remains the most progressive and inclusive international legal instrument on refugee protection. Yet on the 40th anniversary of the adoption of this historic document, Africa still struggles under the weight of massive human displacement.
At the back of our minds, here were these people struggling for their independence and they're running into your countries, and the idea was treat these people well. That was the idea then. We never expected that we would have refugees from independent African states tearing themselves apart.
In the 1970s and 80s, new kinds of conflict sent fresh waves of refugees across Africa. Proxy wars between the Western and Soviet powers brought chaos and misery to many parts of the continent. A lack of good governance and human rights violations fueled the flames as countries were torn apart by internal wars over identity and control of resources. Innocent civilians, men, women, girls and boys, were caught up in the crossfire and had their worlds destroyed.
Many of the refugees today are people running away from political oppression, where previously perhaps the oppressor had a white skin. In Africa, you are oppressed by people with the same color skin.
I realized that I could not stay in Mogadishu, otherwise we would all die. I brought nothing with me. I have only 2 hands and 2 small children. I couldn't carry anything.
They have abducted me. They tied me with the ropes. They took my father, then they went behind the house. Then they killed him there. They say that we want to change you to become a soldier. They say that in case anybody made a mistake of escaping, they're going to kill that person.
Frightened, hungry, traumatized, and often alone, those forced to flee their homes because of violence or persecution are in desperate need of protection. They need access to basic shelter, food, and medical care.
As soon as I saw the soldiers, I escaped. They shot at me, but thank God I managed to get away. They destroyed my house, stole my motorbike, bicycle, my clothes, everything. They took everything, leaving me with nothing.
Despite its limited resources, Africa continues to host, protect, and assist a third of the world's displaced people, a hugely disproportionate number. This generosity, as spelled out in the OAU Refugee Convention, is still firmly rooted in the continent's traditions of offering hospitality to anyone in distress. While refuge may bring safety, camps are far from ideal. Life is restricted and the possibility of work is almost non-existent. Many of the uprooted choose to settle in urban areas, but life here can also be very hard and access to assistance limited. With determination and leadership, solutions can be found to these problems. Since the mid-90s, the number of refugees has fallen in Africa. It now stands at just over a third of what it was in 1994.
Well, there is never a humanitarian solution for a refugee problem. The solution is always political. because many political solutions were found. Many countries finally managed to enjoy peace. And that allowed us to support a massive voluntary return of refugees to their own countries of origin, together with the possibility to resettle them in such countries or to locally integrate in the countries of first asylum that have been so generous.
The first choice of most refugees will be to go back to their home countries as soon as they consider it safe enough to do so. They often return to conditions of extreme hardship. In countries emerging from conflict, there are few or no jobs, and the infrastructure lies in ruins. Almost everything, homes, clinics, roads, schools, must be rebuilt.
The most pernicious impact, actually, it's on people themselves, before even we talk of the economy. It's families which becomes disrupted. It's families which lose the ability to sustain themselves, and in that they lose part of their dignity.
The 2003 peace agreement in Liberia set the stage for a massive return. By the end of 2007, more than 800,000 refugees and internally displaced people had gone home. One of the most crucial foundations of rebuilding a life is education, yet it's often one of the first casualties of war.
The first thing my husband and I want to do is to make sure that we educate these children. And then I want us to build our own house, somewhere where we can live in peace.
You know, years of education lost for a generation or two generations of kids, they're irreplaceable. You can try to catch up. You build schools, you train teachers, etc. But those years which were lost, you never recover.
Once a forgotten solution for protecting refugees, local integration has recently become a real possibility in many countries across the continent. In 2008, Tanzania made the generous gesture of offering citizenship to the Burundian refugees it sheltered since they fled in 1972. Some 80% have applied. Although the number of refugees in Africa has fallen significantly in recent years, the problem of human displacement is still far from resolved. The desperate plight of the many millions of people who have been forced to flee their homes, but who have stayed within the borders of their country, remains unaddressed by any binding international protocol. These internally displaced people are by far the largest group of the uprooted on the continent.
If you are internally displaced, you are under the responsibility of the authorities of your own country, and in many circumstances it is very difficult for them to grant protection and assistance, and we witness also several areas in which the international community also struggles to be able to support those activities.
Forced from their homes and communities, the internally displaced have particular vulnerabilities, the majority being women and children. Often forced to live in extremely isolated places, they may suffer the same abuses which forced them to abandon their homes in the first place.
The states do have a responsibility to protect their people from ethnic cleansing, from crimes against humanity. And that where the state fails or manifestly cannot do it, the international community has a responsibility to step in and help protect them. And so I hope this emerging new norm would also help and help get the message across that governments cannot hide behind sovereignty as a shield behind which people are brutalized or whose rights are abused.
There is no food here, no plates, no soap. Even if you are sick, there is nowhere to get help. My brothers are starving. I lost my parents. Although I am in school, we have no money.
2 days later, some people called me to say they had found my husband's identity card alongside the river. When I went there, I saw many bodies floating on the river.
More than half a century after independence movements started in Africa and several years into the new millennium, the continent is still home to millions of forcibly uprooted people. Massive populations living in limbo represent a tremendous waste of human potential as millions reach adulthood with little or no education. Displacement carries other costs too. The strain on the environment hands a devastating inheritance to future generations.
One cannot and should not underestimate the negative impact, because in some of these situations, the kids have no access to education. They have no access to good nutrition, which can impair their growth and development. And they are often not able to live the normal lives of children. And it does have impact on their growth and development. And I think it is essential that we avoid placing children in those situations. You know, I am confident it can be done. It will take effort. It will take dedication by people in leadership and with the support of the international community, but we can do it.
I want to be a doctor or a teacher.
After I finish school and have my certificates, I want to get a job. I would like one day to be the Minister of Home Affairs.
Almost exactly 40 years ago, African nations signed up to the OAU Convention for Refugees. Building on the Ouagadougou Declaration of 2006, the continent's leaders would again be providing global leadership on displacement by considering the first ever binding convention specifically dedicated to the protection and assistance of internally displaced people.
The AU Draft Convention on Internally Displaced Persons, if adopted by head of state and government in the next summit, will be the first legal binding instrument to assist the displaced person, IDPs.
The peace and stability of Africa will ultimately depend on its ability to eradicate displacement.